Yi Seong-Gye is almost 8 years old in Rise of Kingdoms, so if you're a new player, should you still be investing in him, and is he still good in the end game? And if so, how much longer will that be the case when we know legendary archers are coming within the next probably 4 to 6 weeks? Today we're going to answer those questions to find out if Yi Seong-Gye's future is in jeopardy or if he's still going to be one of the best archer investments in Rise of Kingdoms. But before we jump in, of course, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now before we jump in, of course, as you guys know, I'm a sponsored partner creator with Rise of Kingdoms, and we just hit 95,000 subscribers, which is insane. We are so close to 100k, so if you enjoy this video, consider dropping a thumbs up down below and hitting that subscribe button, because you might think you're sub but you're actually not. And with that out of the way, let's jump right in and talk about Yi Seong-Gye in 2026, because his position in the meta is definitely a little bit different than it was last year, and there's a lot to talk about here. Now use the chapters down below to jump to the part of the video that you care the most about. So if you're a new player, stick around right now, and if you're an older player, you can use the chapters to jump ahead. The first thing we have to talk about is how do you get Yi Seong-Gye, because this is one of those commanders that when you first start playing Rise of Kingdoms, you're going to notice that he's actually not in the golden chest, right? He is not one of the commanders that you can receive here with your gold keys. So how do you actually get Yi Seong-Gye as a legendary commander? And the answer is actually pretty simple. You get him from a limited time event called the Wheel of Fortune, and this comes around not too long after a brand new kingdom opens. A couple of weeks in, you'll see Richard the First on the wheel, and then after Richard's wheel, you'll see Yi Seong-Gye. Okay, and these Wheel of Fortune events happen every 2 weeks, and then once you get to the late game, you're going to be able to get Yi Seong-Gye either from the Wheel of Fortune, or you can get him from a bundle called the Daily Special Offer. Okay, he shows up here and you can get him in these chests. All three cost $3 a day. Of course, once you get your first 10 sculptures of him and you unlock him for your account, you can use universal legendary commander sculptures and convert them to Yi Seong-Gye and level him up that way as well. So if you've been hoarding these, you can spend a bunch of them on Yi Seong-Gye, but should you actually do that? We're going to answer that question here. But in order to understand if you should invest in Yi Seong-Gye in 2026, we have to know exactly what he is doing. He is an archer, garrison, and skill commander, but that doesn't really tell the complete picture. What we need to do is understand what his skills are actually doing. And when you first get Yi Seong-Gye, his skill will read deals direct damage to up to 5 enemy troops in a fan shape, damage factor of 1400. Every additional target reduces the damage to each target by 15%. This is a 1000 rage requirement. Okay, and you'll see that the expertise bumps that up. We'll talk about the expertise in a second, but basically what this is a vanilla AoE skill damage shot. Very good stuff in the early game. 1400 damage to 5 targets is much higher than most of the other early game commanders, right? One of the things that you'll notice in the early game is a lot of players are running around with Minamoto, primarily because he is strong in the early game and you can get him from the VIP bundles. But if you compare this to Yi Seong-Gye, this is 1400 damage factor to 1 target with a chance to deal an additional damage 1200 over the course of 2 seconds. Okay, and again, you compare him to other commanders like Cao Cao, he's going to deal 1400 damage to 1 target with a debuff. So when we're looking at Yi Seong-Gye and comparing him to some of the other most powerful season 1 commanders, okay, you'll see season 1 up here, he's dealing way more skill damage than pretty much anything else in season 1. It's almost not even close. The second skill is really interesting because this gives you a 10% chance with each basic attack. Now a basic attack is the damage you deal every single turn, right? If you are connected to a target and you're dealing damage to that target every turn, you're launching a basic attack, unless you have some sort of unique debuff or something. We won't talk about that now. So with every hit you're dealing to your target, you have a 10% chance to gain 100 rage and a 100% bonus to archer attack for 3 seconds with a 5-second cooldown. Okay, now this is an interesting skill primarily because yes, your damage will spike a little bit for 3 seconds, but mainly the extra rage is really what matters a lot here. Okay, this rage is going to help you cast your active skill faster, not only with Yi Seong-Gye but with whoever he is paired with, and that is a huge bonus. Casting your active skills, this is where a majority of your damage comes from in Rise of Kingdoms, not just in the early game but especially in the late game as well. And so this rage engine is very powerful and ages quite nicely in Rise of Kingdoms. The third skill is easily the worst skill on Yi Seong-Gye, and it's not even close. Okay, this says if this commander is serving as your city garrison, your garrison gains 10% attack and your watchtowers gain 10% attack. Okay, now your watchtower gets defeated if someone's hitting your city. Your watchtower dies within like 6 seconds. Okay, so this part of the skill effectively does nothing. Like this actually is basically nothing. So really all you're getting is 10% attack for your city if he is on your wall. And frankly, that's not very good. You really shouldn't be taking rallies or swarms on your city, especially if Yi Seong-Gye is on your garrison. So this overall is really bad. And also, this doesn't do anything if he's a garrison of a flag or a fortress. And most importantly, this doesn't do anything if he is fighting in the open field, which is primarily what you're going to be doing with Yi Seong-Gye, despite him having garrison talents. And we're going to talk about talents in a minute. I'm going to share with you guys the very best talent builds for Yi Seong-Gye, but the fourth skill is very powerful. This is easily his second best skill, if not his best skill. This skill gives you 50% more skill damage. This is very vanilla. This is a very flat bonus, but this is a massive bonus to what he is doing best, which is skill damage. And then the expertise is also really nice here. Okay, so it's still 5 targets, but it changes the shape of his fan to a circle. So it is a 5 target circular AoE around Yi Seong-Gye, which means if people are behind you, you're still going to be hitting them, and it bumps up that damage factor to 1700. It sounds small, but going from 1400 to 1700 is a 21% increase in damage factor, and that's also applied to 5 targets. Okay, so very strong expertise on this commander, and that 1700 is only amplified by the 50% more skill damage that he's dealing. And this applies not only to Yi Seong-Gye, but also to whoever he's paired with, right? So if your other commander that you're using also deals skill damage, they're going to be increased by 50%. This is a super strong buff. I don't want to downplay this. Very good stuff on the fourth skill. Okay, so now that we know what his skills do, what the best ones are, let's take a look at talent builds for Yi Seong-Gye. The primary thing you want to focus on when you're leveling him up is getting through the skill tree. All right, the skill tree historically is very powerful, especially for archer commanders like Yi Seong-Gye, who deal a lot of skill damage on their active skill. Burning Blood gives you more rage, so you cast your active skill more frequently. All for One is really powerful for your secondary commander. So if Yi Seong-Gye is the primary, then your secondary is going to deal more skill damage as well. And typically you are going to pair 2 skill damage commanders together. That's where a lot of synergy comes in. Tactical Mastery means you just deal more skill damage, 3% across the board. Really nice. And by the way, when you look at how small this is, right, you get a 3% bonus to skill damage for 3 talent points, and then you look back at the fourth skill in Yi Seong-Gye, this gives you 50%. That's insane, right? So I'm using this comparison for those of you that are new players, just so you can really grasp how strong this is. Talents give you 3%, his skill gives you 50%. It's actually wild. Heraldic Shield makes you take 6% less skill combo and smite damage. This actually was recently buffed to include combo and smite damage. If you're a new player, you're probably not going to see any combo or smite damage in KVK 1. That doesn't come around until KVK 2 or 3, so don't worry about that too much. Polarity is really strong as well. It says whenever you use an active skill, you gain a 6% bonus to all types of skill damage dealt for 6 seconds. That's a very long buff window. A lot of buffs in Rise of Kingdoms are between 2 and 5 seconds, so to have a 6-second buff is really nice, but this will primarily benefit your secondary commander, just like we see with All for One. And then eventually you'll come up to Feral Nature, and this is a really strong talent as well. And this says whenever this commander launches any type of basic attack, you have a 10% chance to gain 100 rage. Well, that sounds really familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, that's actually exactly what the second skill says for Yi Seong-Gye. Okay, so now you have 2 chances with every basic attack to gain 100 rage. Now technically they can stack, they can both proc on the same turn, but there is something called a rage cap in Rise of Kingdoms, which is the maximum amount of rage you can gain. So unfortunately, if they do happen to both happen on the same turn, you lose a little bit of synergy there, but most of the time they are not going to proc on the same turn. They're only a 10% chance. So all in all, this almost doubles the amount of time that you're going to gain extra rage. This is another rage engine. This is very strong. In the archer talent tree, there are a couple of really good talents, primarily Venomous Sting. This gives you 8% more skill damage. Okay, so again, we look over here at Tactical Mastery. This gives you 3%, so for 4 points you get 8%. So that is again really good stuff here for archers, and it also again puts into perspective just how good that fourth skill is on Yi Seong-Gye. All these talent points spent, and you're not even close to the 50% that you get on Yi Seong-Gye's fourth skill. Along the way, you're going to get 3% health, which is nice, 9% more damage to infantry, which is really really good, especially in the early game, because a lot of players use Sun Tzu in the early game, whether it's with Ethelflaed or whether it's with Yi Seong-Gye or somebody else. This is going to deal a lot more damage to them because archers counter infantry, right? So really good stuff. And then also you grab Razor Sharp over here. So again, every basic attack you launch, you gain 9 rage. So it's very similar to Burning Blood. So every turn you're going to get 18 rage between the two of these talents, which is really good stuff. Then you've got some points left over at max level, and this is where you're going to put them in rapid fire. This is a little bit more normal damage. This is just the white numbers that you deal every single turn. Arrows Knocked gives you 9% attack when you go below 50%. So it's a nice buff, but it is conditional. And then you have 2 points in attack over here. Now, one micro optimization that you could make here if you wanted to would be to take 2 points out of rapid fire and put them in full quiver here. This just gives you more attack but less normal damage, and historically normal damage is better, but an increase to your attack will be a slight bump in the skill damage that you deal, which remember is the primary thing that Yi Seong-Gye is doing. Again, this is a micro optimization between these two talent builds. If you want to go all in on skill damage, go for this one. If you want a little bit more well-rounded and safe build, you can go with this one. You're probably not going to honestly even notice the difference between these two most of the time, but all in all, this is what you're going to get from all of your talents. Okay, these are all of the bonuses that you're going to get to your stats here. Really good stuff. Now, one quick point that I want to make about talents is that only the talents of your primary commander matter, and as you'll see later in this video, Yi Seong-Gye is typically a secondary commander. Okay, so what that means is everything we just talked about here only applies to him being a primary. Most of the times he will not be a primary unless you're like in the early game for whatever reason you're using Yi Seong-Gye as primary. That's fine. So most of the time, if you messed up the talents on Yi Seong-Gye, it doesn't matter, right? Don't waste a reset on him. You're probably not going to use him as primary anyway. Just slap him as a secondary and forget that you messed up the talents, because it literally will not matter at all. These do absolutely nothing if he is only a secondary. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The other thing we have to talk about when it comes to Yi Seong-Gye is actually his museum relic. Okay, now the museum relic comes around at the end of the off season before season 3. Okay, so once you go through season 2 of KVK and the Lost Kingdom is over, you're in the off season before season 3 starts, before you go into KVK again, you will get access to the museum, and this is where Yi Seong-Gye gets another buff. Now, in order to unlock relics here, you're going to need relic coins. Okay, and the more relics you unlock, the more this will cost, so be very careful unlocking things and really only unlock the relics that matter the most. Yi Seong-Gye's relic is arguably the best relic in the entire game though, so you don't have to worry about that. And then once you unlock the relic, you also need to the exhibit. Once you unlock the exhibit, then you have to unlock the relic itself. Okay, I don't know why they've done this. I actually think it's annoying that there's two different currencies here, because you can't do one without the other. Having the exhibit unlocked doesn't actually do anything. It just allows you to buy the relic, which is dumb. I think they should fix that, but that's a tangent. I digress. Either way, once you get the relic for Yi Seong-Gye, eventually you can upgrade it to tier 3. Okay, so tier 1 will give you 10% defense, 3% skill damage. Tier 2 bumps the defense up double to 20% with 5% skill damage, and then tier 3 more than doubles the skill damage and brings it up to 12%. Okay, so you're sensing a trend here with Yi Seong-Gye where his 4th skill gives you 50% skill damage, his active skill deals a ton of circular skill damage as well, and now you're dealing even more skill damage, so a total of 62% skill damage on Yi Seong-Gye plus whatever talents are on the primary commander he's paired with. Really good stuff here. All right, so you definitely need this, but the museum is important not only for the skill damage but also the archer defense, because one of the things that you'll notice about Yi Seong-Gye's kit is that he actually doesn't have any stats, right? Which is very awkward, because if you look at other commanders, especially even in the early game, right? You look at commanders like Richard, right? He gets some amount of infantry attack and defense. You look at commanders like Cao Cao, who gain some amount of cavalry attack. You look at commanders like Minamoto, who give you some amount of cavalry attack. A lot of these early game commanders, KVK2 commanders even, give you a bunch of stats. When you look at Yi Seong-Gye, you'll realize that actually he doesn't get any stats at all besides a chance of archer attack, and it's only for 3 seconds. Now, if you want to simplify this skill, it's on average over the course of many battle turns, it's on average 20% archer attack. Okay, but again, the chance that it happens, the cooldown, I don't like to look at it that way, even though again on average yes he gets 20% archer attack, but it would be much better if it was a flat archer attack all the time, right, rather than a proc chance. But either way, we finally see with the relic a guaranteed source of stats, and not only that but it's defense, which is just a little bit of tankiness that Yi Seong-Gye really needs. We'll talk about that later in the video. Okay, now the other thing we have to talk about when it comes to Yi Seong-Gye, and this is more so relevant when it comes to should you invest in him in the early game. Okay, this is specifically for new players in the early game. Should you get him? And the answer is yes, and the reason for that is because it doesn't matter how many sculptures you put into him, it doesn't matter what progress you make on him, all of that doesn't really matter, because at the end of kvk2 you get what's called a commander swap event. This is a limited time event that allows you to swap your progress on one commander to another commander for a certain number of gems. Okay, you buy tickets with gems, or you can buy bundles if you want to spend in the game, but either way that is basically the most important event for new players in the entire game. I made entire guides based on that. Check those out if you don't want to mess that event up. It's very important that you get it right. But with Yi Seong-Gye, I would argue he is the strongest kvk1 or season 1 commander in the entire game, and so you can dump all your sculptures into him, and then once you get to that commander swap event, if you have nothing better to swap, you can just swap your progress on Yi Seong-Gye to somebody more powerful like Emperor Qin. Now we're going to talk about Emperor Qin later in the video, but I just want you guys to understand that like getting Yi Seong-Gye in the early game is, there's nothing wrong with that, right? He is very strong in the early game. You might as well get him, you might as well use him, and then if you don't want him anymore going into the late game, then you can just swap that progress to someone else. Now there are pairs in the end game that you would want to have Yi Seong-Gye for, so I'm not here to say that Yi Seong-Gye is like, you know, once you get to the end of kvk2 he's useless, just get rid of him and get someone better. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying here. Okay, there are ways to use Yi Seong-Gye in the end game that are very powerful, but if you're a new player, a free-to-play player, a low spender who just doesn't have you know, sculptures are, they're rare, right? They're hard to come by. So if that's the case, then okay, yeah, we have to do sort of a evaluation of the opportunity cost here, and it's like, okay, yes, Yi Seong-Gye is good in the end game, but there are better commanders in the end game that you would rather have, and so the swap there does make sense. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that here. The last thing that I want to mention about when it comes to investing in Yi Seong-Gye is making sure that you max this first skill before you do anything. All right, now what that means is, you know, if you leave him at a low level, then this is the only skill that will be unlocked, and so you can just get that to 5. If you've already leveled him up a little bit, then what you could do is the skill lock feature, where you can actually just come in and lock this to 1, and now any skills that I add to my, let's just call it Yi Seong-Gye, will only go in the first one, even though all of the skills are unlocked. Okay, I also didn't realize I was only 1 away for another skill up here, which is exciting for my CJ. But either way, make sure you use the skill lock feature for Yi Seong-Gye so you get this first skill to 5. That is the most important skill. The second most important skill is the 4th one. Unfortunately, there's no way to guarantee get points in that. Then we have the second skill, and then of course the worst one is the 3rd skill here. Okay, so now that we've covered everything there is to know about Yi Seong-Gye, let's kind of summarize his pros and cons. Okay, let's start with the good stuff. He is dealing massive AoE skill damage that is still pretty relevant even in the end game. Like, even though his damage factor is a bit lower than some of the newer commanders, for example, King Arthur deals 2,800 to 3 targets, Bai Chi deals 2,400 to 5 targets, right? So yes, this number specifically is power crept, but it is a circle, and he gets 62% more skill damage when you incorporate the relic. So all in all, he is doing what archers really like, massive AoE skill damage. He also has a tier 3 relic, which gives him a little bit of tanky stats, even more skill damage. He also has a built-in rage engine, which not every commander has, but this is very good, not just in the early game but also in the end game, because more rage equals more active skills. You pop them faster, which means more damage, more DPS. Another thing he has going for him is that he's a season 1 commander, so if you're a new player, you can invest in him early on. This is a commander, a project that you can work on almost from day 1, right? I know he comes around a couple of weeks into a kingdom, but you can start to plan for him on day 1, and you can start to invest in him shortly after, which is really nice. Seeing that progress, making that progress in a commander that is meta viable and relevant in the early game and end game is very nice. That is a huge plus for Yi Seong-Gye. You don't have to like wait months and months and months for a commander to come around that you can finally dump sculptures into. You can just dump them into Yi Seong-Gye, and eventually, if you need to, swap them to somebody else. And also, he's really good at PvE content, right? And what I mean by this is barbarians. Okay, so one of the cool things about his active skill having a circular shaped AoE is that if you're attacking a barbarian, that circular AoE has a good chance of pulling in another nearby barbarian, which is basically free kills. It is a free barbarian kill. You won't have to actually spend any action points to do this. Typically it costs some amount of action points to attack a barbarian, but if your AoE active skill causes the barbarian to attack you, then it doesn't cost you anything. All right, which is really good stuff. And so even when Yi Seong-Gye hits the bench, even when he becomes less relevant, he still will retain that relevant factor to him, in that you will probably always want to use him to some extent when killing barbarians out in the world, because he gives you a chance at just getting more free stuff. And that is really great for free-to-play players and low spenders, especially during events, things like Marauders, things like the 7k gem event where you're gonna have to kill a lot of barbarians, right? Like there's a lot to love about AoE damage when it comes to that PvE grind for barbarians, okay? But there are also a lot of weaknesses to Yi Seong-Gye, and I know I've been very positive towards him throughout this entire video, but there are some glaringly obvious things that his kit is missing that can't go ignored. One of them we kind of touched on already, but his stats are relatively low. Even with his museum relic, on average he's got 40% of stats, which frankly just doesn't cut it in the end game. And not only that, but half of those are RNG based, right? But I mean, like, let's just take a look here. Sun Tzu Prime, one of the newest commanders in the game, gives you 50% of stats on just the second skill alone, and they're guaranteed, and then he gets another 20% on top of that, so that's 70% of stats, right? So the meta commanders in Rise of Kingdoms today have almost double the amount of stats as Yi Seong-Gye, right? On top of that, he doesn't have any archer health, and with having only 20% archer defense on the relic, he is particularly fragile. He doesn't have any skills that reduce the damage that you take. So for example, if we look at an epic commander like Sun Tzu, he actually has 10% damage taken reduction, which is incredibly tanky, right? We don't see anything similar to that on Yi Seong-Gye. He's mostly all damage all the time, and so he really can't take any damage himself. On top of that, he doesn't have any march speed, which is a massive downside, much more so in the end game, but you will still notice it in the early game as well, especially when you see a lot of players running around with Minamoto. These are cavalry commanders with bonuses to march speed, and they're going to be very fast in the open field, because if you take a look in your training grounds over here, okay, you'll see cavalry have a higher base march speed than the archers do, right? And so out of the gate they're faster, plus they get march speed advantage with the skills on Minamoto and Cao Cao, whereas archers are out of the gate slower and they don't get any march speed on a commander like Yi Seong-Gye. So that is a huge downside, and that is glaringly obvious in the end game, okay? Like, it is just so abundantly clear that he is very slow in the open field. You're going to show up to battles a little bit later, you're going to have a hard time leaving battles, okay? So really a huge downside to him. So he is by definition a glass cannon. He deals a ton of damage, he cannot take any damage, and how fast are cannons on the battlefield? They're not. They're slow, they're heavy, you got to pull them, right? And the final weakness to Yi Seong-Gye is one that I don't think anybody has talked about before in a video. I've never even mentioned this myself, but it actually comes from his museum relic, and that is that right now at the time of recording this, it is unclear if we are ever going to get tier 4 museum relics, and frankly I don't think we are. I think that the museum system has slowly been winding down. We've been seeing fewer relics come here, we've seen relics get announced slower, we've seen the buffs to the latest relics being relatively weak except for Nebu, right? Like, a lot of the latest stuff in the museum has been very lackluster, and there's really just no indication or evidence that we're ever going to see anything higher than tier 3, because a lot of commanders haven't even gotten their tier 3 to begin with, and many commanders are sitting at tier 1, right? And so the downside to this is that we can't even, you know, expect his museum relic to sort of save him in the future, right? Like, there is no indication that this is going to get better in the future and kind of bridge the gap or sort of fill in the blind spots or the weaknesses on his kit, right? So as the late game meta gets stronger and stronger and stronger, the museum relic for Yi Seong-Gye is set in stone. This is probably all we're ever going to get. And so as new commanders get more and more stats, as they get more and more skill damage, this is locked away, right? Whereas if you look at a commander like Minamoto, you could say, okay, well, at least he still has a tier 3 relic upcoming, right? Eventually he'll get a tier 3, and that could be really strong, right? We could see 50% defense, 40% attack, or something like that. Like, there's something to look forward to with commanders that only have a tier 1 or tier 2 relic, whereas with Yi Seong-Gye, there's probably nothing more coming down the pipeline. He is at his end game state, he is finished. And again, there could be a tier 4, right? There could even be a tier 5, tier 6, tier 7, but like right now there is just no evidence or indication that we're ever going to see a 4th tier upgrade to Yi Seong-Gye. I hope we get one, right? I'd love to see 30% archer defense, or maybe add a 3rd stat bonus of like 15% march speed or something. Like, that'd be great. But again, there's just no evidence to support that, and I think it's more likely that he's not going to get any more buffs for the rest of Rise of Kingdoms, and that's a huge downside. Now, the last thing we have to talk about with YSG is the best formation to use, and this is super simple. At the time of recording this, the best formation is wedge formation, but we do know as of recent announcements a new skill damage formation is coming. So if you guys don't want to miss updates when that comes into the game, you want to subscribe down below and click the bell so you're notified. But right now, obviously, skill damage formation makes the most sense here because he's dealing only skill damage on his kit, and most of the commanders he's paired with deal skill damage as well. And when it comes to your inscriptions, the ones that you want to shoot for are of course Hunter. You get this from the KVK shop. This is a super nice boost to skill damage, which is multiplicative. Balanced is very good. Intrepid is very good as just a vanilla massive boost to skill damage, but of course those are very difficult to get, so focusing on getting focus fire or boiling blood, those are really a bit easier to get. I'm not saying that they're common, they're still rare inscriptions, but at least they are a lot more attainable than the special inscriptions here. And then for common inscriptions, obviously you're looking for things like enraged, devious, brawler, and daring. These all give you a 2.5% bonus to skill damage, so you're just min-maxing for the same thing we've been talking about all video. It's also worth noting that breaker is super good, furious is really quite good as well, and artisan is even better than daring here, which I don't even know why both of those exist when one is clearly better than the other, but those are a few others that are worth keeping if you've got nothing better. Now let's move on to the best commander pairs for Yi Seong-Gye in season 1 of KVK. Now there are a couple of commanders that we have to talk about here. First, let's talk about the epic commanders. Okay, first of all, we have to talk about Sun Tzu, and the reason for this is because yes, Sun Tzu is technically an infantry commander, but the synergy lies in the AoE skill damage. You'll notice both Yi Seong-Gye and Sun Tzu deal 5 target AoE skill damage, and they both have a rage engine. Sun Tzu's rage engine is on the active skill. He's also a little bit tanky, which is something that Yi Seong-Gye is lacking in season 1, and we get another 20% bonus to skill damage. So what you would want to do here is, if you're running all infantry, you would run Sun Tzu primary because he's the one with the infantry talents. You'd probably do something like this here. All right, make sure you get all this march speed here because you need it. But if you want to run a full archer lineup, then you would do Yi Seong-Gye primary, Sun Tzu secondary. For me, I would say Sun Tzu primary is probably better, but that's just me. If you want a full archer build with epics, you would go with Herman. Now I would do Herman primary purely because they have the same talent trees, and you actually take less experience to level up Herman to level 60, so you're going to get there a lot faster in the early game, and you only need to use purple stars on him rather than wasting gold stars on Yi Seong-Gye. So Herman primary is just cheaper and you get pretty much the same result. Herman has a single target damage factor, and he has a rage debuff and a silence to the target, which is very powerful, and he gives you march speed, which we really like to see. Plus he has a rage engine on the 4th skill here, 100 extra rage, so a lot of synergy between these two commanders, and again they're both archers, which is really nice. If we're talking about legendary season 1 commanders to pair with, I would point you towards Thutmose, who also has a 3 target AoE, so not as strong, right? Less damage factor, fewer targets, but he also gives you some march speed as well, 10%. You get a nice little damage bonus outside of Alliance territory. You get some defense here, like really nice stuff here on Thutmose. Very, very great pairing in the early game, but this is something that I would do if you're a whale, right? If you're a big spender, you can get Thutmose. If you're not a big spender, I would not spend sculptures on him. Of course, you can always commander swap him later, but really, I don't know, just for new players, I'm not super sold. If you get super lucky from the gold keys and you get a ton of El Cid, this is also a decent place to put sculptures. The only downside is that the stats and march speed are on the 3rd skill, and you don't really want to skip this. Instant proc damage is nice. The active skill gives you a little bit of a disable to the target, but it's only to 1 target, right? So he's kind of like a better version of Herman, right? But he's legendary, and so it's really hard to get the sculptures for him. So again, this is kind of entering whale territory. If you're looking for an infantry commander to pair Yi Seong-Gye with as a whale in the early game, Pyrrhus is going to be your guy. He deals single target skill damage, and he also gives you some march speed, some health, which is really nice, some attack. There's a lot to love about this pairing. Okay, so the Pyrrhus is the tank, the Pyrrhus is dealing the single target damage, and then Yi Seong-Gye behind him is raining down the arrows, and of course this would be a full infantry build. If you want to use cavalry with Yi Seong-Gye in the early game, you're going to be looking at Minamoto. Okay, and again, the reason is because this is skill damage. Both commanders are dealing skill damage. You would run full cavalry, put Yi Seong-Gye behind him, rain down those arrows, deal that AoE damage, and you are good to go. All right, moving on to kvk2, a lot of the pairings that you would use are very similar to the kvk1 pairing. So by that I mean you can use Minamoto, you also could use somebody like Saladin, right? Saladin I think has lost a little bit of his hype over the years, but he is a nice budget build at 5551. He's also a bit more tanky than somebody like Minamoto, so you could do Saladin primary with Yi Seong-Gye secondary. Really good stuff there. When it comes to infantry, you could do Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great has a lot of march speed actually on the third skill, 30% march speed, which is great. He also gives you shields to yourself and nearby allies, so he's very supportive. He has instant proc damage just like El Cid, so there's a lot to love about Alexander the Great here. And when it comes to archers, you can either do the Cyrus the Great, which is a season 2 commander now, or you can continue to run the Thutmose, who is just a very good AoE skill damage commander. That's pretty much going to do it for season 2 legendaries. But let's talk about the end game, the season of conquest, season 3, the cutting edge of the current meta in Rise of Kingdoms right now. Does Yi Seong-Gye find himself in those pairings? And the answer is actually yes, but really only with one commander, and that is good old Emperor Qin. Emperor Qin is single-handedly keeping Yi Seong-Gye in the meta when it comes to archers in the end game. Now that's not to say that you couldn't technically run Yi Seong-Gye behind somebody like Ashurbanipal, for example, is another place that some people tried to run Yi Seong-Gye as a secondary. I think it's definitely a bit slower than the Emperor Qin primary, but it's something people tried to do. But really, if you're a serious endgame player playing at the cutting edge at the highest level, Emperor Qin primary, Yi Seong-Gye secondary is the best way to go, and it's pretty much not even close. Now, is Yi Seong-Gye the best commander to pair with Emperor Qin? I would say he's kind of tied actually, and the reason is because Zhuge Liang actually has a little bit less damage to lend to your Emperor Qin, and the fact that he doesn't give you 62% skill damage that we see from the 4th skill plus the museum, but he does have 20% more skill damage, which is something, and he has a really powerful debuff on the active skill. The damage factor is a little bit higher, he has more health, so he's a little tankier, he has even more damage on the 4th skill. So like all in all, Zhuge Liang is a bit more of a complete package when it comes to stats, debuffs, and everything like that, but Yi Seong-Gye is raw damage. So the way that I like to put it is, you know, if you want your Emperor Qin army to get the best trades possible, pair him with Yi Seong-Gye. If you want all of your armies to get the best trades possible, pair Emperor Qin with Zhuge Liang. And the reason for that again is the debuff on the active skill here on Zhuge Liang. It's going to be a slight downgrade in damage per second, but an upgrade to your tankiness and to every other army around you when it comes to the damage output of your enemies. So really great stuff there. Now for new players that are just getting to season 3, I want to quickly explain why YSG is so powerful behind Emperor Qin, in case you guys missed my Emperor Qin guides back in the day. But the reason that he's so powerful is because of how Emperor Qin's kit works specifically. As you can see here with Iron Pierce's bronze, you spend rage to convert your basic attacks into skill damage. Okay, so every turn, instead of dealing basic attack damage or normal damage, you're dealing skill damage. And beyond that, the active skill gives you the Eternal Emperor effect, which means whenever you deal damage with Iron Pierce's bronze, you're dealing 5 target AoE skill damage every single turn. Okay, so what that means is with YSG, the 50% skill damage on the 4th skill and the 12% skill damage from the Museum Relic, now that's not just buffing the active skills, that's buffing your damage every single turn to up to 5 targets, right? And so really it is just a brute force way of making YSG relevant. Like he just gives you basically a 62% all damage bonus to Emperor Qin, and that's just, even though it's not fancy, it's not flashy, it's not special, there's no buffs or debuffs or all this other cool stuff, it's literally just like so much damage for Emperor Qin specifically that it just brute forces him into the meta when it comes to archers, right? Like that's really all there is to it. It's nothing fancy, it's just a massive damage bonus. With that being said, there is definitely one thing on the horizon that makes me curious to know how much longer Yi Seong-Gye will stay in the meta for archers, and that is the fact that we are expecting new archer legendary commanders coming sometime in April. It could be mid-April, it could be late April, maybe it's even early May, right? But at some point in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we should be getting new legendary archer commanders, and that begs the question, is Yi Seong-Gye officially going to kick the bucket in the endgame meta when those archers come around? So let's quickly take a look at what the current archer meta is, so that way we can figure out who's going to be benched when these these upcoming archers come out most likely, right? Of course, if they come out and they're just hot garbage, then maybe none of these get benched, which would be a really bad position for archers to be in, by the way, but that's a topic for another video. Okay, so right now, if you're running one archer march, it's either Emperor Chin with Zhuge Liang or it's Emperor Chin with Yi Seong-Gye, right? If you're running two archers, then you're definitely splitting your Zhuge Liang off to something else, and you're either going to be running Zhuge Liang with Philip or you're going to be running Zhuge Liang with Herman. Now, the Herman is a much more powerful pairing, but it's slightly slower, and so that's definitely something to consider. The other thing we have to talk about, actually, and I don't know if a lot of people are even talking about this, but the Herman Prime might be better off as primary now because it's actually slightly faster. A lot of people forget that, right? But the support tree actually has 9% march speed, whereas the skill tree only has 6% march speed, right? So you get 3% more march speed from the support tree. It's actually right here, and on top of that you get hasty departure, which gives you a 60% march speed bonus for 10 seconds after leaving a building or resource point. So if you are going to try to flee an enemy, you jump in and out of those resource points, you're going to be super fast doing that, right? But on top of that, the support tree just got a buff in the form of loose formation and in the form of emergency protection, right? So you're going to see above me, you're going to take 9% less combo attack damage and smite damage, and also ranged combo attack damage and ranged smite damage, right? So if the enemies have a ton of those Gajamata with Cordoba, you're going to take less smite damage from those as well. So with the recent buff to the support tree, I think it's very possible that you could even be running the Herman Prime as the primary here for those reasons. Now, of course, it will deal a little bit less damage because this skill tree is, that's what the skill tree is for, but I guess this is a topic for another video. I'm off in the weeds here, but either way, you know, this is going to be sort of your two army lineup, right? It's one of these two. And then if you're running three archers, you're probably running this, okay? Or honestly, probably something like this, depending on who you want to run there, right? So this is your three archer lineup right now in Rise of Kingdoms. Some people try to fit Shajar in there somewhere. Other people just swear that she just gives you bad trades because of all the healing. That's a topic for another video. But if we get new archers, right, in April or May, then who's going to take the bench here, right? Well, the answer is pretty clear. It's probably not Yi Seong-Gye. It's probably Philip, right? Because the way that you look at the Zhuge Liang Philip is kind of like the archer version of Alexander the Great. I mean, that he does the same exact thing. So if you're running Liu Shay Alex, similar to what you would be seeing here with Zhuge Liang Philip, it's not exactly the same, but they function the same way. The reason that you're running Philip here is mainly for the march speed. Now, I know he also has instant proc damage, and there's, you know, there's extra casts of active skills, a little bit of a buff on the active skill, 30% damage, right? Like, I know there are reasons beyond the march speed that people use Philip, but let's be honest here. If we had another commander that dealt AoE skill damage with the same march speed, Philip would probably take the bench, okay? Or you just keep him behind like your King Arthur or something like that. So you're either going to bench the Philip or you're going to bench the Ashurbanipal, because the Ashurbanipal frankly does have a pretty low damage factor on the active skill, and beyond that, his march speed is only outside of Alliance territory, so it's conditional march speed bonus here, whereas somebody like Philip or Herman or Emperor Chin, they have march speed all the time no matter what, right? And that does make a difference here. So these are the first two on the chopping block in my opinion, right? Yi Seong-Gye doesn't have the march speed for sure, but his damage output and the amplification that he gives to Emperor Chin is just so good that it's hard to ignore. It's like, sure, he's slow, but he still trades incredibly well no matter what, and so why change anything? Why not just leave this how it is, you know? So I think for that reason, YSG is kind of safe in the 3 army meta. What about in the 2 army meta, right? How does that actually work? Is he safe here? The answer is maybe. If the new archer is, let's say, AoE skill damage with 20% march speed or 25% march speed, well, then all of a sudden you're running that commander with your Zhuge Liang, or you're going to run your Zhuge Liang here with your Emperor Chin, and then you're going to run that commander with, you know, Herman Prime or YSG or something like that, right? So in the 2 army lineup, I think he still has a chance to remain depending on what this new potential commander is. But the big question is the 1 army lineup, right? Will he stick around in the single archer lineup if this new commander is really strong? And the answer is probably not, right? Probably not, because if this new archer has a bunch of march speed and it's AoE skill damage, then it's probably going to be a Zhuge Liang 2.0, in which case, you know, Zhuge Liang gets benched, that new archer goes here, right? And I'll use my little placeholder. I should have been using this the whole time, okay? That new archer would go here, and that's how that's going to go. I don't expect the new archers to be an Emperor Chin. Archers don't need another Emperor Chin, frankly. If you want my predictions of the new archers, I made a whole video about doubt that, check that out. But there's a chance that the new archer just pairs well with Emperor Qin and that's your single best, and then you don't need Yi Seong-Gye at all, and so that's a waste. All that being said, Yi Seong-Gye right now in the current meta definitely has a role behind Emperor Qin, but his future with the upcoming archers is a little bit more questionable than it was last year in 2025. Back when Emperor Qin came out, we knew that we were many months away from new archers, and so it was safe to invest in YSG, safe to use the YSG for a very long time, dust him off the bench, whatever. But now his future's a little bit more uncertain, right? And so if you are an end game player, I cannot advise you to invest in Yi Seong-Gye right now. I do not think, if you are just getting into Season of Conquest or you've been in Season of Conquest for a while, I would say save your sculptures, get Emperor Qin. If you need to invest in anybody, I would say get Zhuge Liang. He's very strong. Yes, he's slow, but he is kind of a more well-rounded Yi Seong-Gye, and I think that he's more likely to last in the meta. Again, that's all speculation. All right, so just bear that in mind. Really, when we're a month out, 6 weeks out from new archers, you probably shouldn't be investing in anything until those new archers come. Like it could be a huge waste of sculptures. I wouldn't recommend it. The only safe investment for archers right now at the time of recording this is Emperor Qin, because I really frankly cannot imagine him falling out of the meta with just one new commander. It makes no sense. So keep that in mind. So if you're a new player, yes, invest in Yi Seong-Gye, and if you have to, you can swap him during commander swap. If you are an old player, do not invest in Yi Seong-Gye right now because his future involvement in the meta is a little bit in question. I think he probably will stick around, but we'll have to wait and see. But guys, that's gonna do it for this video. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, please consider dropping a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel more than you know, and consider subscribing. You might think you're subscribed, but you're actually not. Double check down below because we are so close to 100,000 subscribers, and comment down below your thoughts on Yi Seong-Gye. Is he gonna stick around in the meta or not? Let me know down below. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.